Hi, welcome to Project Geospatial. And with me is Mike Grochol. And today's topic for Mike is going to be young professional leadership in defense contracting. This is also in parallel with our Geospatial Frontier, a virtual technology fair for the geospatial industry. So Mike's not only on our Project Geospatial podcast, but he's also streaming on that event as well. So Mike, go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll lead with that.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Mike Grochol. I'm the president and CEO of Iron Eagle X. We're a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business defense contractor, mostly focused on the intelligence community and special operations. My background from a military perspective is in special operations and close air support when I was in the Air Force. And for the last several years, better part of a decade, I've worked my way up in the community to now owning and managing my own company, focused on providing professional services contracting to DoD.
So, thanks a lot, Mike. Darryl, take it away.
Hey, everybody. Darryl Murdock here. I hang out here occasionally with Adam, and he is gracious enough to let me join the conversation with him and Mike today. Mike, thanks for joining us, man. And for our listeners out there, Mike and I actually worked together for a fairly short time, about a year-ish. And a small company, and there's like a whole set of lessons learned that we could regale you with from that. But actually, kind of want to start with that, Mike. Because we laugh about it, you and I, but in the real we actually did, both of us, for different reasons, learn a lot about that experience. So can you talk a little bit about what you learned leading up to Iron Eagle X? Kind of take us through a little bit about the lessons learned.
Absolutely, yeah. So when you and I worked together, you're right. It was definitely a really interesting experience. I'm not sure what the non-disclosure agreements allow us to say, but
doesn't matter.
No, I'm just kidding. But so it was really my first opportunity working in defense contracting and working for a small business. I had only been out of the military for about a year, and I had an opportunity where the government wanted me to lead a project. And because I had some relationships to the folks that owned and ran that company, I was able to bring a project to them and sort of start my own team. So it was a really great combination of getting to learn more about defense contracting, being on site as an engineer, building ISR systems for SOCOM, but also learning the business side of defense contracting and how to build out a business and grow a team that we grew, in 6 months to a multi-million-dollar line of business that was, fairly profitable. So it was a really awesome opportunity. And I learned a ton about, leadership in particular. And not just because this is your podcast, but honestly, one of the biggest things that stuck out to me was a lesson that I learned with you. We worked with all kinds of different people, right? From more senior folks that had worked in defense contracting for years to some more younger folks. And if you remember, there was one individual that was struggling in our company, and he was more of a junior person, such as myself. And I remember you gave me some really great advice about how at times leadership wasn't setting him up to be successful, wasn't setting him up to do the types of work that he was really good at. And they were giving him tasks that he was more likely to struggle at. And the opposite, and they were doing a similar thing with me. They were giving tasks to me that, I could have probably, or that he probably would have been better at, and vice versa, giving, not giving tasks to him. So I learned a lot about that from a leadership perspective, that when I became a leader, that I really wanted to set people up to do the types of work that they were going to be best at. And that was really, I think, something that team struggled with, and something that future teams that I was a part of were pretty good at, is because we never tried to make people do things that they weren't built to do. And sometimes from a business perspective, as a business owner now and someone who has to make hiring and firing decisions, sometimes that just means someone's not the right fit for your company because they can't do the particular task that you need of them, and maybe that's the only role that you have available. But it also allows that person to move on and go be successful somewhere else because they can find that thing that makes them successful, instead of hanging on to somebody or hurting your own organization by hanging on to folks. You can really start to focus on, setting people up for what they're going to be really good at.
So there's really kind of a couple different topics that you touched on. One is, kind of maybe at the core of what our original discussion was leading up to this, and that is, okay, so young professional, we're talking about professional development, right? So as I think about professional development, and I spent 5 years as a VP of professional development, so it's just my perspective. It doesn't mean that it's the only way to think of it, right? So I like the way you framed that discussion. There's really two parts to what I heard. One is the individual professional development. What do you do to be able to, do you plus people up in areas where they're weak, or do you amplify their strength and put them in teams, right? So those are the kind of conversations you and I have had for quite a while now. And, just because somebody's not good at something, it doesn't mean necessarily they can't get good at something. It just may be they haven't been exposed to that, right? I'm just wondering, have you, can we maybe relay a few experiences where, okay, so this is not about, throwing somebody into the deep end of the pool and saying, good luck with that. We know you're not any good at it. It's just maybe they've had zero experience or exposure to something, but all of a sudden they bloom, right? So how do you deal with that kind of, unknown unknowns from a personnel standpoint?
Well, I think it starts with something, I guess I learned in the military when I was an instructor, which is you have to learn the learning style of that particular person, I think is step one, right? Some people learn really well by just being given the Lego blocks and they want to try and fail and build things up and they do well. I can speak for myself. I don't enjoy that. I want someone to come in and show me how to do something and show me kind of what the end state is. And then I'll start to ask questions and break it down and get there. So I've had leaders, and it wasn't malicious at all, but I've had leaders unfortunately set me up to fail because they wanted to just give me a task and say, go figure it out on your own. And that's just not how I learn. And then I've also seen the reverse where you try to walk somebody through something, but they're really someone who's actually going to do better and understand it better if you give them the chance to try and fail. So I think that's step one. You got to figure out how somebody learns. And then the next thing is to do exactly what you're saying, which is to recognize what is their talent and experience in that. And if they have some experience, then obviously you can give them some rope. But if they don't, you definitely have to guide them. You can't expect that people, by osmosis are going to have a skill. For me, I think the one that I see in my field a lot of times is the financial side, right? A lot of people know how to be good at their technical job, right? Most people that start businesses in my industry are really good at something technically. They're a phenomenal software engineer, Intel analyst, linguist, you name it. But, when you're doing my job, you're an expert in someone's 401k and how to get healthcare and a whole myriad of things that you never thought that you were ever going to really do. And so, you have to learn by, going out and just seeing how other people did it. You never want to reinvent the wheel. So, the biggest thing for me that I've learned is go find an example of something in the past and copy that. Analyze that example, find out what's good, find out what was bad, and then, do a test run. It's like any sort of experiment, I guess. Don't go and just try to do it from scratch. Go find an example.
Yeah, actually, I would like to step in really quick. I think I love this topic because from my history and my career, not just with the Air Force, but several jobs I've had in the commercial area, I think there's been several examples of leadership that either has enabled me or failed me, and in terms of growing my career, and I'd like to get your input on several of these aspects. In the military, I think nowadays I've seen a lot of innovation in the military in terms of them growing and enabling the innovative communities. For example, a lot of young airmen with ideas trying to bring those forward. But even 10 years ago, when I was in, they struggled with that, trying to champion young individuals who had a lot of innovative thought, but didn't quite fit into the cookie cutter jobs that they had in place, right? But how do you champion these individuals who are obviously go-getters? And oftentimes they don't they don't necessarily need a lot of help, but they just kind of need just someone to speak for them and give them the support to say, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. But on the other hand, how do you not, while you're trying to enable somebody who can be successful, my question to you, Mike, is how do you not alienate the other workforce around them that may have a lot of ideas, but might be a little bit more outspoken, who don't know how to speak up with themselves at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, you obviously just have to be clear about what your mission is, right? If you're running a unit in the military or you're building a company, you have to be clear about what your mission is and what the end state that you're going for is. I think it starts there. If you're not clear about where you're trying to go, then everything else probably falls apart along the way. So I think then it's about figuring out who has that background that is sort of well situated to, enable that. So when you have a young airman that's got a particular skill set, and you want to help them, you align that to the mission and the mission outcomes. So I think that's how you're able to give that person more rope and more leeway, and sell that to your organization. Because I think that's a really good point that a lot of times the organization itself doesn't necessarily enjoy that, or can be concerned when you give that kind of power to someone who's younger. But really, you just have to take the risk and show results, right? I think people respond to results. When I initially, in my last company, when I initially joined there was a much more senior executive, C-level executive that worked in the company. And I had a lot of, big ideas and big plans for how I was going to grow the organization. And he had, 20 years of defense contracting experience, and he did not necessarily agree with all of those plans. But ultimately, what won out in the end was that I executed. Right, I had that leeway, and in that time frame, I executed. Yep. So I think that's really where you have to enable those younger airmen or soldiers within an organization. Is you have to ensure that they execute, and if they don't, be honest and say, "Hey, we tried something, it didn't work, and now we're going to do something else." In large organizations like that in the government, believe it or not, I'm a big believer that their number one responsibility is to manage risk more than anything else. This may sound counterintuitive, but I don't always buy that their job is to be innovative. I buy that their job is to manage risk and make smart bets on how they can better the mission. And sometimes that's being innovative. Sometimes that's being cutting edge. And sometimes it's literally sticking with the tried and true method to get things done. So that's where I think selling that mission about where you're going, selling that statement to your workforce is so critical. Because they'll understand based off of that where you plan to take risk and where you plan to stick with that tried and true method.
So how do you balance that, Mike? Then, okay, so in government contracting, you typically have a statement of work or something that's pretty proscriptive, right? So it tells you what it is you're supposed to do and what your deliverables are, right? So with that as the backdrop, you typically have either task orders or you have job descriptions that have to get filled, and people need to fit certain profiles. But when you come across somebody that has a different mix of skills, can you take us through how you would approach the government, right? A government POC on your end, and say, hey, look, I got this guy or I have this thing that I want to do, and I've got this guy or gal that can do this work. How do you broach that subject? Can you take us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I think you have to identify the person on the other end that's doing the buying for the government. What is their personal risk profile, if you will? Like, what amount of risk are they willing to take? And a lot of times government people, that risk can be a little bit lower than I think people would want. And then you sort of have to understand that, not to use a very tired analogy, but if the government is this giant aircraft carrier that you have to turn, you have to be patient and turn that thing slowly. So in tasks that we have changed significantly, and I feel like I've been lucky enough to be part of a lot of things that have pushed a good amount of innovation in government, the ways that we were successful was we didn't try to just change everything on the first day. We were relentless in our approach of how we continually tried to push innovation, right? We got 5% better every day. We got a little bit more innovative every day. And we sort of lived on the compounding interests of that innovation. And I think that's where people can get turned off in defense is because they see the ability within commercial industry to make these huge changes, right? To be incredibly disruptive. And that's just really, in my opinion, not how government systems play out. And that's okay. You just have to understand the rules of the game. And so that doesn't mean that you can't make huge changes. I mean, Darryl have had the opportunity to meet some incredible people across the intelligence community. The first one that obviously comes to mind that a lot of people know is Sue Gordon. And she's made incredible changes in the intel community, but she didn't do it overnight. She did it by being relentless in her approach to making innovation happen in the defense and IC. And so I think that's really what it takes is you got to be relentless in your pursuit of it. If you're just going to say, I'm going to make this one change and everything's going to be great, I don't think it's too big of a system. It won't respond.
So, so one of the things that you brought up in our conversations leading up to this discussion, there was a kind of a common theme that would keep popping up, and that was this idea of underestimating, especially our entry level or younger, less experienced folks. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that, and what does that really mean for somebody, entering the workforce? Okay, so is it an airman just coming off of active duty and going into the contracting workforce, or somebody that's got a few years of experience and they're thinking about changing jobs, right? But they don't really have a big resume. So what does that look like?
Yeah, I think so. The thing that I found in my experience, and I still see now in our more junior workforce, is that they're the ones who are with the clients every day, right? They're the ones that are right there on site with the mission. An airman just coming off of active duty or soldier, Marine, they know exactly what the needs are. So that's really your biggest advantage, is that you're the one who knows how to use that system, right? Unfortunately, sometimes the guy who's sitting there giving the requirements for the next generation Intel system hasn't been an Intel analyst for, if you're lucky, a decade.
If you're lucky.
Most of the time it's longer than that. So they have a unique perspective where they understand this is exactly the problem that I have to solve. And so I think that's really the biggest thing that people underestimate is how much those folks can really make little changes to systems that will have a big impact. One of the things that we did for AFSOC, Air Force Special Operations Command, that made a really big impact to their intel mission was we did a statistical analysis on what was taking the analysts the most amount of NUG work, of additional time. And while we had a situation where the Air Force wanted to throw a lot of money to these 5 to 10 intel analysts that worked in this very high-end fusion shop, they had 90 other analysts that worked in a much smaller in a much bigger shop that were completely bogged down with a lot of additional minutia tasks. And we were able to show them that by investing in those tasks and making that better, that they created 10 more analysts that could go work in the high-end fusion shop. And so that created significantly more high-end intel products that they were able to produce, that were able to, take out more bad guys. So it's sometimes those guys who point out, yeah, that's really cool if you could make a machine learning algorithm that could automatically detect X, Y, or Z, but I got to click 20 different windows just to open up my system every day, and it takes 15 minutes for me to just turn on my console to start doing analysis.
I'm completely with you. And there are a couple different ideas that you had there. One of which was this idea that the folks actually doing analysis may know, I don't know, what it takes to do analysis.
Yeah.
What a concept, right? But you think about how infrequently we harvest that information. And here's the thing that I have encountered, and I'd like for you to talk to it. It's like, okay, so how do you allow the gathering of that information on a non-intervention basis, if you will? Because anytime you go, my experience has been even with, several gubbies that say, hey man, it's okay, you can go ahead and do this. There's always going to be 1 or 2 or 3 that get upset that you're taking time away from people on the floor doing the real work. Right. So how do you balance that from a, from a communication standpoint? How do you manage that?
I mean, I think it's hard. You just have to have senior leadership buy-in and be really focused, like we talked about, on driving a result and being able to show a tangible result in a short period of time. When I worked for some really, really large, joint commands, the one thing that I thought their senior leadership struggled to do at times was clearly identify what a positive result would look like. They pushed, we want to be innovative, we want to have this, we want to have that, but they didn't set any sort of short-term goals or bars to say, when we get here, we've made progress. So there was never any victory to claim.
No metrics, nothing.
Exactly. And
right? Data beats disagreement. We used to say all the time, right? And so, so no data.
Yeah. You got to have something that you can point to and be like, look, we did it. Because that's what people want to see. They just want to see progress, I think, a lot of times, right? So when you're looking at things, in today's world, politically, it's, hey, the economy grew X percent, or consumer confidence is at this level. We have little metrics that we use to measure things. And I think inside of an organization, it's the same thing. For us, a lot of times it's, number of FTEs, full-time equivalents that we add every month. And we talk about that as a team. Like, hey, we're adding on average 4 to 5 employees every single month. Or did we meet that metric? So whether that's the right metric or the wrong metric, sometimes it doesn't matter. People just want to see that you have a plan, you're executing, and that you're meeting the goals that you set for yourself.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I want to pop in real quick. So I kind of want to turn this around a little bit, because we talk about professional leadership. I definitely this topic, but I also want to, from your perspective, what is the biggest mistakes a young professional will make in trying to enable themselves or grow their own careers, and how, from a leadership perspective, what advice would you give them?
The biggest one that I give is a phrase that I call market comparables. No matter what you do, not to burst anyone's bubble, but someone else has done it before, or someone else has tried to do something like it before. So go find a success story somewhere else in whatever it is you're trying to do, and analyze it and understand, why did it work? What were the challenges? When we were building our last company, we grew it from about 30 folks to over 250 in 4 years. And it was interesting because I analyzed another company that had a similar rise, and there were certain things that they did that didn't make a lot of sense to me, that I at the time thought were mistakes. But what I realized as our company was getting bigger, was that those were things that you had to do to survive as you got bigger. I just hadn't done the right research to understand that those were requirements. So I think the biggest thing is understand that somebody has achieved what you want to achieve, and go analyze it. And the other thing is, especially as a young professional, ask for help. I said this, people want to be part of your success story when you're a young professional. They really do. Sometimes internally, you'll get some pushback because people don't want to see you rise too fast, but especially externally to your organization, people love to see young professionals work hard, have a dream, and achieve a goal. And if you ask for help, I think they're all in to help for the most part. So I think go out and analyze where you want to go and who's done it in the past. Talk to that person if you can, or someone who's like them, and then ask for help. You're not going to do it on your own. The overwhelming majority of the success in my story is built on not just one name, but a dozen plus names of people that have given me good advice, or really great opportunities, or flat out made an introduction that's made money come into our business. So,
well, I like to actually, I think that's a good note to share around the table here. With that said, Darryl, I want to bring it back to you for a second in terms of who would you say is one of your biggest mentors or influencers for your career? And I want to turn that back to the same question for you, Mike, and I'll say who that is for me too.
So I'm not sure there's one person that I would point to, right?
Okay, well, several counts. That makes sense.
For me, there were folks that I would not necessarily call mentors, but I would call them extreme influencers that, looking back, they could probably be labeled as a mentor, but they were folks that I encountered during certain inflection points in parts of my career. One of the largest influencers, you can call him a mentor too, probably, but he was more of an influencer and more of kind of a big brother to me, was actually my father's best man, who back before the days of the internet literally left me a note when I was visiting him, when I was kind of in between jobs, shall we say. And I just separated from the military, and I was kind of figuring out what is it that I want to do after 6 years of on active duty. And he literally left me a little article that was clipped out of a newspaper back when those things actually existed. There were dinosaurs that were grazing out in our front lawn, and I think Fred and Wilma were riding their bikes past our house. But I'm like reading this thing. He left and he went to work. He was a professor. He actually was a practicing attorney. And what he did was he took an interest in me as a person. It wasn't just, he wasn't trying to tell me to do something. He took what he knew about me, took his calculus, and actually just encountered this article. And it was just funny. It was just this article about environmental engineering that he found in a newspaper. And he clipped it out and put it down there. And I said, boy, that looks kind of interesting. And I went literally from there to the library, and then I ended up in grad school. So, that was maybe one of the larger influencers that I found. In terms of other mentors, I mean, there are folks that are in our community. There's one person I hope we have on this show, a guy named Lori Jordan. Right. So he works at Esri. And Lori, if you're out there in the world, there's somebody, folks know Lori. Lori was one of the co-founders of ERDAS and now works for Jack out in Jack Dangerman out in Redlands. I learned a lot from Lori about the need to deliver. Right. So those are just two and there's lots of others. Right. There are a lot of people that I'll miss along the way, but I think of inflection points in dealing with people, that took an interest in me as a person. And I think that's really what differentiated those two gentlemen that I just mentioned. And there are a lot of others that took an interest in me too. But interest in not just here's what you should do for your next job, or have you thought about how to change your resume? It's actually they gave a crap about me as a human. So that's a long answer. Sorry, but I wanted to give specifics.
No, I think that's great. Especially, I think it's important that, at least for me personally, I think having along the career path, always having someone to look up to or strive to be better yourself is key. You don't want to go wrong. It's like, well, I think I'm pretty damn good at what I do. I'm just going to help everybody else. I'm at the top of my curve. I don't believe that at all. I think there's always someone to look up to. And to help me kind of mirror what I'm doing to, hey, am I as good as these people, or what can I learn from them? Because there's always a success story that I strive to kind of adopt, and it just actually helped me learn some humility what I'm doing as well. So Mike, I want to turn that question over to you in terms of who influenced you to what you do now, and especially from a young professional leadership, on this session and giving advice to young people, who has driven you to become who you are today?
Yeah, no, I think like Darryl, unfortunately, I don't have a clean one person answer, but for me, I think what both of you hit on, which is what I almost wrote down as Darryl was giving his answer, because it seemed to make the most sense. There really seems to be, I'm sure there's more, but 3 buckets of leaders that impacted me, right? One is the thing you just mentioned, which are the people that you aspire to be, the people that, have that success that you really want to emulate. The others, I have some folks that I would call them like the people that got me started, whatever journey it was, they were the people that kicked me over the edge and said, hey, like you should go do something, not talk about doing something. And the last is people that like really invested their time in me, that said, hey, like I see you trying out here. And so I'm going to invest. So from an aspire to standpoint, I'll kind of list who I have now and maybe list one person who it was in the past. Right now, ironically, I mean, I mentioned her before, Sue Gordon, from a career perspective and the things that she was able to achieve and her ability to communicate those goals and motivate the workforce. That's definitely someone that I look up to quite a bit. For someone that got me started, I have a few. I had some supervisors in the military that were definitely folks. I had a supervisor who literally told me that I should get out, even though the unit really wanted to keep me. But he just said, "Hey, I think that you have a lot of opportunity outside of the military, and it's obvious to me." So that made a big impact. And then someone that Darryl and I worked with, a guy named Bill Pardue, who's now the CEO of a company called Athenium Analytics. Bill was the one who really took a shot on me and gave me a job as an executive in one of his companies or a director, and let me build out a team of people. And that was a risk. I mean, that was a 6-figure risk when it came to salary and bonuses and that kind of stuff. I mean, he thought that I could do it, and flat out told me that he expected me to achieve, and that really meant a lot to me. And then another person that we worked with at that company, his name was Wayne. He really spent hours teaching me the back office side of defense contracting, and how to build what he called project execution plans, which were really the spreadsheets behind the scenes of how you ran a business. And then the CEO of the last company, IFPA, Brian Blees, Brian did the same thing. He really taught me how to do things like build rates, and run an organization. And obviously, we're not working together anymore. But I really couldn't have had the skills that I have now without people like him who invested countless hours teaching me those capabilities. So I really think it's that, right? You got to have somebody to aspire to, somebody to reach out for, somebody who says, "Hey, I think you can do it," that you can trust. Another person I think of in that space is Chris Tucker. I know he's been on your podcast, and Chris is definitely one of those people that will inspire you and push you out the nest. And then, again, the people that'll invest their time in you, and really give more than they have to. Those to me are the people that have made a big difference.
No, that's amazing. I think for myself, from in the past, when I was in the military, I always look back on the commanders or my immediate supervisors who enabled me. And actually, there was a mixture of enlisted supervisors I had that, again, just championed what I did, literally allowed me to kind of do some innovative initiatives that otherwise would just have sometimes arguably even thrown me out the window. So two of those individuals, I'd probably give credit to, Sergeant Toy. I'm not going to give first names out there, and Sergeant Crouch. Both of them are out of the military now, but another big one would go to Eduardo Pires, who's actually still in the military. I believe I want to say he's a full bird colonel now, but I'll have to double check with that. But either way, those individuals championed what I did and allowed me to do it, and actually inspired me to influence others while along the way. So outside though, just two individuals today along the way is once again supervisors and people who I aspired to. And I'll say they've actually been a big help in this Geospatial Frontier Conference. So two of my current mentors, Karen Hayes Ryan and Ed Walsner, great individuals to know. And I love not just the help they've given me, but where they've inspired me is how they've enabled me, like how they actually helped me with so much that they couldn't have. I'm like, I just kind of want to pay it forward to people who are younger than me. What can I give back from what experience I have? And they've teaching me, okay, it's right to give that much of yourself to somebody else who I can champion and bring up to a certain level as well. So I think that's really, I like hearing your stories, Mike and Darryl, of who championed you along the way, what inspired you. And I want to kind of go back on a question of, there's a lot of people who signed up for the Geospatial Frontier event who a good bulk of them are military who could be about to leave the military as well, separate and figure out what industry is all about. And what would your first advice to give them in terms of if they were to look for mentors or inspiration out there in this brave new world of contracting or young, defense contracting, trying to discover what the world's really like, and what advice would you give them not to be discouraged of that different perspective?
Yeah, it's a combination of one, you should start the networking process early, but that doesn't mean you should be applying for jobs a year or 6 months before you get out. Like that happens in the last 90 to 120 days. But all the way into that, like last year or so, is when you start, building out a good LinkedIn profile, connecting with people, and starting to really see, again, back to that market comparable idea, like who's gone where I want to go, right? Who's done what I want to do. The other thing is that I always just thought one really great piece of career advice that someone in my life gave out was you should really, figure out based off of three factors what's the most important. Number one is how much money do you want to make? Number two is where do you want to live? And three is what do you want to do? Right. And so judge which one of those is the most important. So if being an Intel analyst and working in the IC is your number one desire and, where you are, or how much money you make is not as important, that definitely gives you some flexibility. If you really need to live in a particular area, such as St. Louis or whatever, for family reasons, then that starts to impact your decision. So I think one, you can't ever just give up on the general logistics of solving any problem, right? So understand kind of what your end state is and what your goal is, and then start to look out there for who has achieved what you want, and ask them for help. Because I don't know a single recruiter out there, for example, whether it's people that work for our company or otherwise, that doesn't want to connect with you a year out before you get out of the service and have at least a 5-minute conversation to find out what your desires are and where you fit. And if you, obviously look, if you're looking to stay in our industry, where the contractors are that are around you. And anybody that has an entrepreneurial spirit, honestly, the biggest advice that I would give them is you need to get out and just learn how the industry works. You need to be just a normal, billable, on-site contractor doing work, supporting the mission, hopefully move into more of a leadership role, by just doing a good job and being somebody that people want to work with and helping out your teammates. And then if you want to move into the side, such as myself, where you own a business, that's when you're ready to do that. Because I think where I see a lot of those folks fail when they try to start their own companies right after they get out of the service is that they just don't really understand what it's like to be on the industry side of the equation and the types of problems that we have to solve. And you can learn that just by spending a year or two doing that as a billable contractor after you get out. I'm not saying that you have to wait 20 years before you start your own company, but pretty much everybody I know that has really successful companies in our industry, and I can think of several people that have grown their companies, pretty exponentially to $50, $60 million a year companies and beyond. They all worked for somebody else for a period of time and learned a little bit about how it worked, and then they jumped in. The ones that jump in right away, they tend to struggle, and then maybe 5 or 6 years later, through a real school of hard knocks kind of scenario, they get their sea legs and they're able to actually, find that success that they're looking for. So,
So, Mike, one of the things that you had sent us a note about was, the difference between what you call a mom and a pop small business, what you're kind of describing right now, is the bootstrapping, et cetera, and what a real enterprise business or enterprise expandable business, to use your phrase, looks like. Can you kind of describe the difference first off, and then maybe talk us through how you've gone from the mom and pop to the more enterprise thinking?
Absolutely, yeah. So and I'll say in my previous engagement, we were more of a mom and pop organization, even though we wanted to be an enterprise organization, and it took a lot of learning to really learn the difference between the two. And the simplest answer is that one of the mentors that I have now, who is a previous founder of a very successful defense company that he sold for over $150 million. He taught us that they had this process he called trigger plans, which was basically they had mapped out as they grew as a business exactly what infrastructure they were going to add. So they started with the end in mind of what they described as a fully blown out organizational chart. And they had a full mapping of what a 500 to 1,000 person organization looked like, what the entire infrastructure of that organization looked like. And then they scaled it back down to start with, okay, I'm a 5 employee company, I'm a 20 employee company, I'm a 50 employee company. What kind of infrastructure can I afford? And then as they tackled different opportunities in their pipeline, they brought in those different skills that they needed to grow as a business. What we did previously, unfortunately, just wasn't as well planned out in that sense, because you end up in the situation as a small where you kind of play the hungry hippos game of defense contractor. It's like, let me get 5 employees here and let me get a contract over there. And before you know it, you're managing 17 different contracts with 100 employees. And that is not easy to manage, right? So you have, so many different invoices. You'd much rather manage 3 projects of 30 plus people, and, be doing 3 invoices every month and 3 monthly status reports, and have, 1 person that can manage the majority of that work. So it's really about having that plan and having that end state in mind from the very beginning. And I mean, it's really soup to nuts in that sense, right? So to the point where what investment banks you want to do the valuation on your company 3 or 4 years out. If today we got GAAP audited financials by Warren Averett, which for a company our size is pretty much unheard of. But the reason why we do that is because 4 or 5 years from now, when we're looking at an acquisition, we've got an audit trail that stretches all the way back from the beginning that shows why we have pristine books, which to anyone who's trying to buy your company, which is ultimately what you're going for from an enterprise perspective, or you're going for investment, that's what they want to see. They want to see that you are running that organization to the same level and standard that $1 billion company is run to. So it's really about investing in that infrastructure. It's harder. It's significantly harder. But it's also, in some ways, a lot, less stressful, because you have a plan and you execute to that plan. And so it's definitely a lot less stressful because you're not worried about where is that next couple of contracts going to come in from, because you are executing to a tight plan.
So let's talk about, can you give us an example then, right? So let's say you've got this plan, you got everything mapped down to the, to the finest detail that you can map it out. Have you experienced a time where you've actually had to turn work down because it didn't fit into that roadmap?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is almost the hardest thing to do. And I would say it's borderline impossible if you've never done it. If you haven't done the mom and pop thing and you don't understand that that's really what you don't want to do, it's just impossible for someone to be just standing there holding free chicken and you to be starving and to turn it down. It takes an incredible amount of restraint. I don't think it's an easy thing to do. And there are lots of mom and pop businesses that, and I don't even say that to be pejorative, I think they're very successful. And they do that for a period of time, 5 or 10 years, and then they decide to become enterprise businesses. And they do it. They do it very well. So it's not to say that if you run a business like that you can't do it. If you want to go directly from startup to that type of, uber success, several $100 million business, it requires an incredible amount of discipline.
Well, you hinted on that earlier. It comes down to your exit plan, right? So if your exit plan is, once again, to get invested or to sell the company, that's one aspect. But a lot of mom and pop businesses, we call them mom and pop, but a lot of small businesses, we actually know a lot that work with a lot of small 5 or 10 companies, 5 or 10 people companies that work in the industry that sometimes are older set of folks in their 40s or 50s who are consultants. I know a bunch of those who are doing that just kind of, they do it to sustain themselves and keep on going. Their exit plan just keep going till retirement.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And then, like I said, there's nothing wrong with running a business like that. But exactly like you said, you've got to start with that end state in mind. There are some people out there who just want to run a 5 or 10 or $15 million a year revenue business that's generating, 10% profit. Because think about it. If you're the business owner of a $15 million a year business and you're generating 10% profit, that's $1.5 million after you paid yourself a salary that you're generating every year in cash for obviously investments in your employee and your infrastructure, as well as dividends for you and any shareholders that you have. So that is certainly not a bad way to live. We sort of call that a lifestyle business, is the way that I've always heard that described. Is that's a lifestyle business. You're trying to make a good living for an extended period of time, versus someone who wants to grow an enterprise and sell to a strategic firm or take an investment from, a private equity firm, where you're trying to have, a 7 or 8 figure, 9 figure exit, where, you have a pile of cash at the end. So it really is just a much different process. And even what those folks are looking for is much different. They're looking for certain types of businesses that have certain backgrounds.
So what advice, Mike, I kind of want to go back to maybe how we opened up this conversation. And I was thinking about, as we're just talking just now, you had, employees that you had to tell, hey, look, I'm leaving this particular entity and I'm going to be starting another entity. Some of the employees, some of them that you knew for a while, and some of them were probably fairly brand new. I very frequently have conversations with folks and of all ilk, and I say to them, I give them the same general advice that I'll give all of our listeners, and here's what it is. Worry about your current job now and worry about your future job now. But if you see an opportunity that you're not sure if you can make a career out of it, does it move you, back to your point about making sure you have an end state? Does it move you closer to your personal goals? And I tell people, hey, say, what's the worst that could happen? I literally ask them that question. And I said, visualize what's the worst that can happen. Okay, what's the worst? Oh, it might not work out. I said, how long would that be? Oh, 6 months. Okay, so your job doesn't work out 6 months from now. What's the worst that's going to happen? You're back on the job market and you'll get snapped up in 2 seconds with your experience and with this extra thing that you now have on your resume. So, gone are the days when, you're working for a company for 35 years and you get the gold watch and the kiss on the cheek and that you get to go to the Lions Club, right? So it's just, that is not the reality of entering into this workforce now, and the expectation that, I'm going to be with this company forever. Not saying that you can't be, because a lot of companies have recognized they need to be flexible also and try to groom their folks and put them in different positions. But generally speaking, you're sort of kind of on your own to be able to build your own future, if you will, to build your own career. So I'm curious, 2 parts. What advice do you give people about examining a new opportunity, right? Especially young career, maybe just came out, maybe just, a year or 2 in the marketplace. What do you tell them about how do you evaluate that thing? You just gave three parts, right? How much money you want to make, what do you want to do and where do you want to live? Great. But then how do you evaluate the actual, no kidding, position and opportunity? What do you tell them?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I've had this conversation and experienced it myself personally. Right after I got out of the service, I worked for a small contractor that did airborne ISR overseas, right? And doing that overseas work, getting paid, frankly, an obscene amount of money to deploy as a contractor overseas with a very niche ISR skill set. I knew that was not going to be my long-term career. Right. But I knew it was an opportunity to get paid a really good amount of money. And I actually lived in France half the year because I could live and I traveled around Europe. So for me, it was about having this short-term experience that I knew I was never going to get the chance to have, because when I was in the military, because I was supporting special operations. I spent the majority of my time in dirty, dusty places, and unfortunately, we don't fight wars in countries that I would rather visit for vacation. So, so that was for me. That was really it. So I think you're right. It's about having that end state in mind and just taking a little bit of a leap, right? I mean, the statistics out there is that the average person who separates from the military or retires has 3 jobs before they settle into one for more than 2 or 3 years. So it's just knowing it's okay to go out there and make the best decision for you and your family and try something and see if you like it. And as long as you go out, I'd say this for someone who joined our company. I would never begrudge anyone who got out of the service and worked for us for 6 months or a year, did the best they could at that job, showed up every day as prepared as they could be to do that job, and then said, hey, this isn't for me. I want to go do something else. I'm going to go tackle this opportunity. So I'm going to go work for your competitor, or I'm going to go work out of defense contracting, or whatever it is. I think, the best advice I ever got, which was from Bill Pardue of all people, was tell people where you want to go and what you want to do, and tell them you're doing it because it's best for what's best for you and your family. And if someone doesn't understand that, then they're never going to understand any other reason that you give them. Right?
Yep.
So that's what I literally, when we in-process our employees, that's what I tell them. My expectation is that, number 1, you are going to do what's best for you and your family. Number 2, I want you to do what's best for the mission. And then number 3, if you accomplish 1 and 2, we're going to try to do what's best for the company so we can continue to grow and be successful. But I promise you, if you do number 1 and number 2, the third one will take care of itself. And so that's really, I think, the most important thing is, try something and just do the best you can at it. And just understand that as long as you did that, you didn't fail at it. There's this great comedian, Christopher Titus, who's got this great line that I've always loved, where he says, I don't fail, I succeed in finding what doesn't work. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is you got to try it, do the best you can, be honest with people. And then if it's not working for you, just move on to something else. I mean, in my experience in industry, you are never going to burn a bridge if that's what you do. It's the people who are constantly just chasing $5,000 more that hurt themselves in our industry, because a lot of times they step over dollars to pick up dimes. They go jump to a job that makes $5,000 more, not understanding if they had gained 6 months or a year more experience in the job that they had now, they could make 3 times that. Software engineers are exactly like that. They are in a skill set when they come out of school. They make anywhere from $50,000 to maybe $75,000 a year in our industry, maybe a little more depending on location. Mm-hmm. The thing is, if you stick with that job for 2 or 3 years, that next job is going to be in the 6 figures. But if you try to go from 65 to 75 to 85 to 95, that's what you're going to find. You're going to get pigeonholed into much lower, in the long run, compensation. Go get that job. Do the best you can at that job for 2 or 3 years. Show that you have the experience that's necessary. And I promise you, you will make up for every lost dollar that you didn't make by hopping to that job right next door for $5,000. Because once you have that experience, and in our industry have that clearance, the opportunities are just they're gonna fall all over themselves
One of the other parts of that too, and you're absolutely spot on, man. It's called tripping over dollars to pick up pennies, right? And
Yep.
And the funny part to me that is how often folks decide that they have to leave their current position to make their current employer a viable thing, right? I need a change. Well, you know what? Did you talk to your boss? Did you talk to folks in HR? Because guess what? They're all incentivized. Once you've been there a bit of time, you understand their culture. You understand the rhythm of the company. You understand what's expected of you. You're part of their ecosystem, and they've spent quite a bit of time and effort and money getting you as an employee to that point. And if you're not feeling fulfilled, how many times have we run across? And I guarantee you, it's been probably hundreds in my case, at least multiple dozens of people who just decided they needed to leave their company rather than just ask for a different assignment. right? I need to do this instead of what I've been doing. Hey, think I could try such and such? And it's not just with their immediate boss; it's with multiple pieces of the chain of command.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The one counter to that I would say as leadership is I think you have to make it known that you're open to that conversation, that you want.
Yeah, that's a hard one.
I think that's where sometimes leadership can fail itself.
Yep.
And that's part of the things that we talk about when we in-process people is that part of the reason why we want them to do what's best for them and their family, and we want them to have those conversations with us, is because we understand that if we're not the right fit, we're just going to tell them that to their face, and we're going to, welcome them to take on that new opportunity. We had a guy that worked for us in my last company. He was one of the first on-site billable people, if not the first on-site billable person that I hired to work for that company. And we called him and the other guy that we hired at the same time our OGs because they were the first guys that we were able to put on-site at SOCOM. And he was a phenomenal software engineer who was really interested in data science. And this is 7 years ago when data science was not nearly as popular or as overused of a term as it is now. But he spent a lot of time and energy on his own, volition to build out that skill set. And after he worked for us for about 3 years, he got offered a job by a company that was next to us managing a data science project that he was going from a 45-minute commute every day to work with us on site to working from home 4 days a week, a $15,000 a year raise, significantly better benefits. I mean, he was working for a commercial, IT company. It was going to be a lot different than an on-site defense contractor. And he told me that we had been so great to him that he wasn't going to take the job because he just didn't want to let us down. And I looked him in the eye and I said, if you don't take that job, you're fired on Monday. Because this is what you're trying to do. This is what you've spent all your time and energy to achieve. And I cannot, tell you how flattered I am for that kind of loyalty. But that being said, you got to take this opportunity. And so I think it comes back to whether if your boss doesn't have that mentality, then your boss is just wrong. There's no other way to describe it. But because of that, he gave us 4 weeks notice and we had his replacement on site and we were able to do some things that were able to benefit the mission and benefit us as a company that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So I think that's really where, from a leadership perspective, and I think that's maybe something that a young professional understands because I understand, having been in that role, what it's like to want to move from one job to another, what it's like to have a desire to continually grow and achieve more in my career instead of just being like, no, I'm good. I mean, because that's a difference. So maybe that's why I have that communication style with people to say, hey, if you want to go and achieve more and climb the ladder, talk to me about it because I know what that's like. That's exactly what I want to do. So, let me help you do it.
Yeah. Well, listen, Mike, this has been a great conversation, man. I think we're coming up on the end of our time together tonight, and we had a couple of different potential topics, and this is the one we picked for tonight, and I'm hoping that we can get you back again to maybe talk the other side of the coin per se. It's the pun intended, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm definitely. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much, Adam and Darryl, for having me on. So, really excited for what you guys are doing on this thing. I saw some of your stuff online and, immediately reached out to Darryl, a longtime friend, and said, hey, this is really cool. So I appreciate that you guys would even give me the opportunity to come on here. So I think your content so far has been phenomenal.
Cool.
No, that's great. I thank you too, Mike, for coming on with us. And just to talk about professional leadership, I think it's important, whether it be yourself, whether it be Darryl, for anybody who has a tremendous amount of experience mentoring others. I think it's valuable insights to gain, and especially for inspiring individuals, young individuals, whether you're in the military or not, coming out into the industry. Because it's a struggle. It really is, being a young professional. You either find the right individuals to help you understand the world around you, or it could be just a massive hardship as you're trying to, just like you were saying earlier in the conversation, people are passing you tasks, expecting you to do it, and you're just like, okay, I know how to do my job, but you're giving me tasks that are just, how do I pave my way forward just to take initiative? What am I allowed to do? What am I allowed to carry forward? How far do I go with this task? Just to, so having those types of insights from yourself has been incredibly valuable, and I hope our audience gets just as much value out of it as well. So with that said, we will include some of the items that you mentioned within the show notes for our audience to look back at. And the recording of this episode will be available within a few hours after we're done here. Darryl, any last minute words?
Just we're going to make sure that we post how people can get a hold of you too, Mike. So really appreciate you coming on, and look forward to having you back again.
Absolutely, thank you.
Well, this is Adam Simmons here with Mike Grochol and Darryl Murdock speaking on the young professional leadership in defense contracting. Thanks everybody for joining us.